What's up, everyone? Now, for every new snake keeper, you're probably wondering, how big of a feeder should I give my snake? How often should I feed my snake? These are all questions people have when they first start getting into snakes. Sometimes you get discouraged about the information that you're receiving online, and I actually just want to touch on kind of answering some of these questions that I've received and hopefully give everyone the information they need that you may not be able to find. Usually you have to kind of get information from different places and kind of get a consensus of what everyone is doing. I hope to actually put it all in one video. So let's go figure this out. So when it comes to snakes, snakes are actually the easiest pet to feed, mainly because they either eat once or twice a week, and depending on the size of the meal, they might eat every 2 weeks. So that's another thing, is when you're feeding your snake bigger meals, they're going to eat less often because they just received more than they needed in that 1 week. So if for some reason you're feeding a snake that's about 800 grams and you're feeding it a small rat on the regular basis, that's probably the size they're supposed to have. Obviously, depending on where you get your small rats from, people have different sizes of small rats. I'll kind of give you a general overview of where people usually list their different sizes as far as weight of the rodents. And for some reason, that 800 gram snake, 1 week, you couldn't find a small rat, but you could find a medium rat. So you decided to feed it a medium rat that was about 20-30% of its weight. The snake most likely won't reject it if they are hungry enough, but then they're also going to reject the next meal because they're still trying to digest and pass that rat that was way bigger than they needed. So when I first started getting into snakes, I actually found this chart that I use, and it's not exact because some people also feed their snakes based off body weight. So this chart is kind of a general overview of sizing based off weight. So it's not really an exact science, but it's really informative as far as what you're probably going to get when you're buying a small versus a weaned or a small versus a medium rat. So I'm going to pull out a few snakes and show you their sizes and what size rat I feed them. And hopefully I can answer any questions that you may have, or if you have any other questions that I didn't answer in this video, maybe put them down in the comments and I'll answer them to the best of my ability in the comment section. And maybe I'll even make a part 2 to this video in the future. So this snake here, she is a pied het ghost or het hypo, and she is about 700 grams. She is feeding weekly on small or large wings. The reason I do large wings is because sometimes she actually doesn't want to take the small, so I just downgrade the size, and I would rather her eat a smaller meal than not eat at all. So that's another thing about snakes. Sometimes they get picky about the sizes they want to eat. Sometimes they get picky about the gender of the rats they want to eat. Sometimes they get picky about the color of their fur. It's a little weird. It's a little crazy. So I actually experienced that with one of my snakes. He actually wouldn't eat male rats that were white. He only wanted female rats or any other color that was not white. It was a little crazy. And eventually I just did whatever he wanted, and he ended up eating the regular black rats that were females because it was just easier for me to feed him that. And most people, when you're buying feeders for your snakes, most likely they're not going to tell you, oh, if you get a female, it's going to be more expensive. They're usually not like that. They're usually selling new feeders. Now, if you tell them that you want a breeder female, and maybe they'll, I don't know how it goes really, but yeah, this girl's eating smalls usually, and sometimes large wings if she decides not to eat. She's all balled up. This is why they call them ball pythons. Literally, they turn into balls. So she is eating large wings and smalls, and she's eating them weekly. So I also want to talk about breeding your own rats a little bit, mainly because sometimes it's easier just to breed your own rats. So because I have 46 snakes, it's a lot harder just to go and find somebody that I can buy 46 rats from every week, and sometimes twice a week. Luckily for me right now, my males aren't eating, and I have some females that are off feed because they are ovulating. So luckily for me right now, it's the cheapest time for me to buy rats, but I still breed my own rats. So when you bring your own rats, usually people want to start feeding them as soon as they're born. I usually wait for the babies to have fur on their bodies before I start feeding them to my baby snakes or my younger snakes. So I don't necessarily call them pups until there's fur. And I'm sure that's how everybody does it, but sometimes I've gotten some pups that were almost hairless, and I'm like, this is still technically a pinky or a fuzzy. So I don't start feeding my baby rats until they are considered pups, which is when they're furred. Some snakes, if they're born smaller than average, and sometimes you can feed them fuzzies and pinkies as well, but for the most part, they won't really eat them because they're not moving around as much. And pups, usually when they're When they're furred, they will be moving around quite a bit, so they're actually more enticing to feed the snake. So another thing is when do you start switching your adult snakes to medium rats? And that really depends on you, because some people just prefer feeding small rats all the way through adulthood. And some people will switch it up and start feeding medium rats once they fit a certain size. My rule of thumb is based off the body weight of the snake. So for example, this girl here, she is a pied het albino, and she is about 1,300, 1,400 grams. She is eating mediums, and I actually started feeding her mediums about a month ago. So she was about 1,200 to 1,300 grams when I started feeding her mediums, and I only weigh at the beginning of every month, so she's actually probably bigger now. So the last time I weighed her, she was around 1,300 to 1,400 grams, and she has actually gotten bigger since, and she's actually staring at the camera. She's crazy. So this is Blanca, and she's one of my favorite snakes, but I'm pretty sure you know that. I've said this in other videos that she's appeared in, and she is eating medium rats now. And again, that was about a month ago that I started that, when she was about 1,200 to 1,300 grams. And that's mainly because medium rats usually start off at about 120 grams and they go up to like 190 grams. And I'll show you that chart. I'll put it up right now so you can see as I'm talking about it. So medium rats usually start around that weight as well. And also the reason I started feeding her mediums is because a lot of this information is information that I received whenever I started breeding. And obviously I'm regurgitating it to make it easier on everyone, because I had to get all this information from several different people. So I was told that for feeder rats, the easiest thing to do is just go from 10 to 12% of the snake's body weight. So if this snake weighs 1,300 grams, usually you want to feed a rat that's about 130 grams. And that's about the average. So that's about a medium rat. So as you can see on the chart, so the chart is showing that around 84 grams is when you start getting medium rats, and up to 174 grams. So that is definitely a medium rat. But I would never start feeding large rats, mainly because usually, so that's a pretty decent sized meal for a snake. I wouldn't actually feed a snake, that rat, mainly because you're probably going to experience that snake going off feed for about 2 weeks instead of just feeding every week. And in my experience, I've never had a male get big enough to actually eat large rats. But if you have a male that's big enough, go for it. Try it out. But again, you're going to feed that snake probably once a month, because it's not really supposed to have that large of a meal. Now, again, that rule of thumb of 10 to 12%, the reason I use it is because if you look at that chart, there was a range, a huge range of that rat size. So from 84 grams to 170 something grams was the size of that medium. So in order for a snake to be eating an 84 gram medium rat, you're looking at a snake that's about 800 to 900 grams, and that's still a relatively small snake in my opinion, and I wouldn't feed that snake a medium rat. Definitely feed it a small rat, but again, that's just my opinion, and that's just the way I've done it. And my snakes eat every week unless they are breeding, and I've never had any issues. I actually have a snake right now, it's about 400 grams, and he is eating weaned, but he's eating weaned twice a week instead of once a week, because he's getting closer to that size where he's going to start wanting small rats. So that's just the way I do it. I kind of still feed that size that's recommended based off the chart, but then the closer they are to the next size, I start feeding a couple times a week instead of just once a week. So sometimes that's just the way you have to do it. You can try switching to the smalls as soon as you think they need to eat a small, but usually you want to go based off the girth of the snake. So this snake here, you can kind of see that she's about this wide. That is about the size of the rat she should be eating. So the size of the rat, usually people say wet rat because most people feed them frozen, but the size of the rat should be about this big in girth, and that's usually about the size that they'll eat. You can try going bigger. They will probably eat that size, but again, that's going to be a bigger meal than they need. If you go slightly bigger, it probably won't be a big deal, but if you go a good difference, like I'm saying this snake is about this big. If you go like this big, it's probably going to be too big. They might not even eat it. So that's just another thing you have to take into consideration. So let me go show you the rats now. I don't have a lot of rats right now because I actually just fed not that long ago. So I'm actually low on stock. I probably will need to buy some rats here soon. So I just show you and kind of tell you what they are, and you can kind of get a gist of what you should be buying for your snake. So these rats right here, there's actually a mixture of pinkies and pups in here. So these are pinkies. Obviously, they were just born not that long ago. And these are pups. So their eyes are mainly closed. They're mainly sleeping all the time, but they are still moving around enough to where they would be enticing to the snake for them to eat it. Obviously, at this size, they're not moving around at all. So a snake doesn't really want to eat something that's not moving around. This is practically an extra large male. This guy's about 400 grams. I wouldn't feed that to an adult ball python, even if it was 4,000 grams. I would actually just start feeding them mediums a couple times a week if they're that big. And then there's also some large females in here that are about 300 grams. And then this female here is about, I would say she's about 250 grams or so. So she's actually a large as well. And here I also have some large females. And all of these babies in here are weaned. They actually need to be moved to a grow out tub here soon. You can see that they're all pretty active. They're not much bigger than the pups that I showed, but they are pretty active and they're eating on their own. They're probably still nursing, but for the most part, they're pretty big and they're probably eating on their own. So that is what a weaned would look like. Then we have some medium females in here that actually just gave birth not that long ago. And then some in here that I've had. These are also some more pups. So as far as pups, I'll be good for a while, but I actually fed off a lot of smalls and mediums not that long ago because some of my males decided to eat. But these girls are all, I would consider these all medium females. I would say this girl is probably around 170 grams. Probably most of them are around that size. Maybe one of them is bigger than the others, but they're all around that size. Here are some more pups. And then we also have some fuzzies in here. You can kind of see that they're growing their fur. They're getting their color. So yeah, we got some pups and some fuzzies in here. So again, I'll be good as far as feeding baby snakes. Again, we have some more fuzzies. You can kind of see that they're getting their color. And that is a fuzzy right there. There's still some that are barely colored, but that's probably because of the pattern. Some of these are patterned like this guy right here. So the white fur ones are harder to tell when they're fuzzies. They usually get their color a lot later than the other rats. Hopefully this was a pretty informative video. Again, there's certain things that you have to think about when you're feeding your snakes. Really, that rule of thumb is go 10 to 12% of their body weight. You can go smaller, but I wouldn't consider going bigger. Most people that sell you feeder rats will tell you what weight, especially if you get frozen, they'll usually write the weight of the rats on the bag or the freezer bags that they have. And if you're getting live, I suggest weighing your live rats to make sure that you're not feeding too big. And I know that kind of seems like a lot of work, but trust me, it'll actually benefit you in the long run, because when you're feeding a rat that's, let's say, 16% of the body weight, and the snake decides to go off feed for a week or two, that is 1 or 2 weeks that you're not feeding that 10 to 12% rat. So if you're thinking about it in that terms, in the 3-week span, they would have ate 30 to 36% of their body weight, because you gave them a rat that was 16% of their body weight. Now they've only had 16% of their body weight for 2 weeks or 3 weeks. So obviously that's getting a lot less food than they would have got if they were just being fed the size that they were supposed to have. So hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully you understand it. If you have any questions or anything else you want to add, put it down in the comment section below. As always, I appreciate it. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss anything that I put out in the future. As always, peace.